The sun was blazing in the cloudless sky as Malik and Tasha walked through the large, wrought iron gates of the community pool. It was the perfect day for swimming. Summer was in full swing, and kids of all ages splashed in the cool water, their laughter filling the air. Families lounged in deck chairs, parents chatting and keeping an eye on their children. Lifeguards sat perched in their high chairs, whistles dangling from their necks, watching over the bustling scene. The siblings had been looking forward to this day for weeks. Their father, Mr. Williams, had been busy with work and hadn't had time to take them to the pool until now. But today he had given them the go-ahead to spend the afternoon enjoying themselves. The Williams family had moved into the neighborhood recently, drawn by its reputation for being a nice area with good schools and a sense of community. Their father, a successful entrepreneur, had even purchased a stake in the local pool to ensure that his kids had a place to hang out and enjoy the summer. But despite their father's success, Malik and Tasha had quickly realized that not everyone welcomed their presence. Subtle looks of disapproval followed them wherever they went. Whispers trailed them in stores and now, at the pool. The familiar weight of being watched settled over them once more. "Do you see how they're looking at us?" Tasha whispered to Malik as they approached the water's edge, her voice tight with unease. "Yeah, just ignore it," Malik replied, trying to sound casual but feeling the same discomfort. He adjusted the straps of his backpack, trying to focus on the excitement he had felt just moments ago. They weren't new to this feeling, but that didn't make it any easier to deal with. They spread their towels on two empty lounge chairs near the deep end of the pool. Malik pulled off his shirt, revealing his toned muscles from years of playing basketball. Tasha untied her beach wrap, her dark curls bouncing as she adjusted her swimsuit straps. They were here to relax, to have fun, and Malik was determined to not let the stairs ruin their day. "Race you to the diving board," Malik said, trying to lighten the mood. Tasha smiled slightly, but the tension in her shoulders remained. "You're on," she replied, her competitive spirit kicking in. Malik bolted toward the diving board, his laughter ringing out as he quickly overtook her. Tasha followed close behind, the two of them racing along the edge of the pool, oblivious to the growing number of eyes on them. As Malik reached the diving board, he glanced over at the lifeguard station. A tall, blonde lifeguard who looked like he could be in college was watching them closely. Malik hesitated for a moment, but decided to ignore the uneasy feeling that crept up his spine. He turned back to Tasha and grinned. "I won," he said, pointing at the diving board as if it were a finish line. "You got a head start," Tasha protested, rolling her eyes. Just as they were about to jump into the pool, a loud voice cut through the air. "Hey, you two." Malik turned to see a burly security guard approaching them. He was wearing sunglasses and a stern expression, his walk purposeful and intimidating. Malik and Tasha exchanged a confused glance as the man got closer. "Can I help you?" Malik asked, trying to keep his tone polite, though his heart was already racing. The guard stopped a few feet away, crossing his arms over his chest. "This pool is for members only," the guard said, his voice laced with suspicion. Malik furrowed his brow. "We are members." The guard gave them a once-over, his eyes lingering on Malik's dark skin and Tasha's braids. He scoffed, clearly unconvinced. "I'm going to need to see your membership card." Tasha stepped forward, pulling out her card from the small pouch she had tied to her swimsuit. "Here," she said, handing it to the guard. "We come here all the time." The guard glanced at the card for a split second before handing it back. "Doesn't look real to me." Malik's mouth fell open in disbelief. "What do you mean it doesn't look real?" "That's our card, man." The guard's tone grew colder. "Look, I don't want any trouble. You either leave, or I'll call the police." Malik felt anger bubbling up inside him, but Tasha grabbed his arm, shaking her head slightly. "Let's just go get Dad," she whispered, trying to calm him down. Malik clenched his fists, staring at the guard who looked at them like they didn't belong. His mind raced. What would Dad do? They shouldn't have to deal with this. The murmurs from other pool-goers grew louder, and Malik noticed a few people filming the scene with their phones. A knot formed in his stomach. It was like they were waiting for something to go wrong, like they wanted to see a confrontation. Tasha pulled on Malik's arm, breaking his thoughts. "Come on," she urged, her voice shaking. Reluctantly, Malik nodded and turned to follow his sister back toward the entrance. But before they could take more than a few steps, the guard spoke again, this time louder, as if wanting to make a point in front of the growing crowd. "Yeah, that's right. You better run along," the guard sneered. "Next time, don't even think about sneaking in here." Malik stopped in his tracks, his anger flaring. He spun around to face the guard, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "We're not sneaking in anywhere. Our dad owns this place." The guard laughed, a mocking, condescending sound. "Sure he does, kid. Sure he does." The guard's mocking laughter echoed in Malik's ears, and for a moment he stood frozen, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Tasha tugged at his arm, her eyes wide with fear and frustration. The stares from the crowd grew heavier, a mix of curiosity and suspicion. They weren't just watching two teenagers at a pool anymore, they were watching a scene, waiting for it to explode. Malik took a deep breath. "We're not lying," he said, trying to stay calm, though his voice trembled with the effort. "Our dad is Mr. Williams. He bought this place last year. The guard raised an eyebrow, folding his arms as if preparing for a showdown. Is that so? Well, I don't see your dad here, do I? And you're not on any list of members I've got. Tasha's grip tightened on Malik's arm. Malik, let's just call Dad. We don't need to. No, Malik interrupted, shaking his head. His frustration and embarrassment were too much to bear. He wasn't going to let this man treat them like criminals in front of all these people. We shouldn't have to prove anything. We belong here. By now, some of the other pool-goers had started whispering to each other, and Malik caught snippets of their conversations. Who are they? Why don't they just leave? Why are they making such a big deal about it? The murmurs stung, and Malik's chest tightened. He knew what they were really thinking. He had seen it before, heard it before, in other places, other spaces where his presence felt like an intrusion. But here, at his own family's pool, it wasn't right. None of this was right. The security guard stepped closer, his hand resting on the walkie-talkie clipped to his belt. I don't care who you think you are, kid. If you don't leave, I'll have to get someone else involved. The words were like a punch to Malik's gut. Someone else. The police. His heart pounded faster, and he glanced at Tasha, who looked equally terrified. The thought of the police being called made Malik's mind race with worst-case scenarios. He knew all too well how situations like this could spiral out of control. He'd seen the videos, heard the stories, and now they were standing in the middle of it. Suddenly, one of the lifeguards, the tall, blonde college guy Malik had noticed earlier, stepped forward. He had been watching the entire exchange, but now it seemed like he was taking sides. Hey, is there a problem here? The lifeguard asked, his tone authoritative, as if he were in charge of the entire pool. Yeah, the security guard said without missing a beat. These kids are trying to sneak in, claiming their dad owns the place. The lifeguard's eyes swept over Malik and Tasha, his expression skeptical. He crossed his arms, mirroring the security guard. That true? You guys trying to cause trouble? Malik's frustration boiled over. We're not causing trouble. We just want to swim like everyone else. Our dad, he really does own this pool. The lifeguard and the security guard exchanged a look, one that spoke volumes. Neither of them believed a word Malik said. They didn't want to believe it. To them, Malik and Tasha didn't fit the picture of belonging. Tasha stepped forward, her voice trembling. We're not lying. We just want to enjoy the pool, like everyone else. Why can't you just believe us? The lifeguard sighed, glancing at the growing crowd of onlookers. Look, we don't want any trouble. But if you can't prove what you're saying, you're going to have to leave. Prove it, Malik echoed, his voice rising with disbelief. What? You want me to call my dad right now? You'll just listen to him then. We don't have to prove anything to you. The tension in the air was thick now, like a storm about to break. Malik could feel his blood pumping in his ears, his pulse quickening as the weight of the situation bore down on him. Every instinct told him to fight back, to stand his ground, but he could also see the fear in Tasha's eyes, the worry that things were spiraling out of control. From the corner of his eye, Malik saw some teenagers, white kids about their age, snickering near the edge of the pool. One of them, a tall, lanky boy with messy hair, called out, "Why don't you two just get lost? No one wants you here anyway." Malik turned sharply, his anger flashing. What did you say? The boy smirked, stepping closer. I said, get lost. You don't belong here. No one does when they have to lie to get in. Shut up, Tasha snapped, her voice shaking with rage. Malik had never seen her like this, so angry and hurt all at once. You don't know anything about us. The boy shrugged, clearly enjoying the chaos. Doesn't look like anyone's buying your story. More laughter from the other teenagers followed, the sound slicing through the tension like a knife. Malik's fists clenched by his sides. He was on the edge, ready to snap. But before he could say anything, the security guard reached for his walkie-talkie. That's it. I'm calling this in. We'll let the cops sort this out. Malik's heart plummeted. The police? This wasn't just about a pool anymore. This was about something much bigger, something far more dangerous. Tasha's voice trembled. Malik, we need to call Dad. Now? Malik hesitated, staring down the security guard, the lifeguard, and the sneering teens. But the look in his sister's eyes made his decision for him. He couldn't let this escalate further. Not like this. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed his father's number. Each ring felt like an eternity, the world around him moving in slow motion as more people gathered to watch, as if this was some kind of show. Finally, the call connected. Dad, Malik said, his voice tight, barely holding it together. You need to come to the pool. Now. The air was thick with tension as Malik stood frozen, phone clutched in his hand, waiting for his father's response. He had barely managed to get the words out before the security guard stepped even closer, eyes narrowed, his hand still hovering over the walkie-talkie. The lifeguard remained by the guard's side, looking unimpressed, arms crossed, as if the whole situation was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. On the other end of the line, Mr. Williams's voice was calm. But Malik could hear the shift in his tone, the kind of calm that came before a storm. "I'll be there in 5 minutes," his father said, and Malik let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Dad's coming," he told Tasha, who nodded silently, her face pale but resolute. Around them, the murmurs of the crowd continued to swell. Pool-goers who had been minding their own business just moments before now watched with growing interest, their phones out, capturing every moment. It was no longer just about Malik and Tasha, it was about what everyone thought they were seeing. Malik noticed a group of older women sitting by the pool's edge, their expressions a mix of confusion and judgment. One of them, with a wide-brimmed sun hat and oversized sunglasses, leaned over to her friend and whispered something that made the other woman nod in agreement. They were making up stories. Malik could feel it filling in the blanks with assumptions about him and his sister. He had seen this happen before, countless times. It didn't matter that their father was the owner of the pool. It didn't matter that they were part of this community. To them, Malik and Tasha would always be outsiders. Tasha shifted uneasily beside him, her eyes darting toward the security guard, who was still clutching his walkie-talkie like it was a weapon. "Malik," she whispered, "what if the police show up before Dad gets here?" Malik didn't answer, his mind racing. He had hoped they wouldn't get this far. The thought of the police arriving, seeing two black teens in a confrontation, made his stomach churn. He had seen too many situations like this turn ugly, and it didn't help that the security guard looked more than ready for things to escalate. The lanky boy who had taunted them earlier took another step forward, grinning as he called out again. "What's the matter? Need Daddy to come save you?" Malik shot him a look, but didn't respond. The last thing he needed was to give that kid more reason to stir the pot. Still, his heart pounded in his chest, and every second felt like it was dragging on for an eternity. Finally, just as Malik's nerves were fraying to the point of breaking, a familiar black car pulled into the parking lot. Relief washed over him as he saw his father step out of the car, his sharp business suit stark against the relaxed summer backdrop. Mr. Williams moved with purpose, his face calm but his eyes flashing with a controlled fury. As he approached the pool gate, the security guard immediately moved to block his way. "Sir, I'm going to need you to wait here. We've got a situation." Mr. Williams didn't break his stride. His voice, calm but firm, cut through the air like a blade. "Yes, we do. And it's one I intend to handle." The guard hesitated, clearly uncertain of how to respond, but Mr. Williams didn't give him a chance to argue. He stepped past the man with authority, heading straight for Malik and Tasha. The crowd seemed to part as he approached, the whispers growing louder but no one daring to step forward. Malik could see the storm in his father's eyes as he reached them, but when Mr. Williams spoke, his voice was even. "Are you both okay?" he asked, his gaze shifting between his children. Malik nodded. "We're fine, Dad, but they didn't believe us. They said we didn't belong here." Mr. Williams' jaw clenched slightly, but he kept his composure. He turned to the security guard, who had followed him, looking more nervous by the second. "Is there a reason my children were treated like criminals in their own pool?" Mr. Williams asked, his voice icy but controlled. The guard opened his mouth to speak, but the words seemed to die in his throat. He glanced around at the crowd as if searching for support, but no one came to his aid. They said you were the owner," the guard stammered, "but I've never seen them before. And, well, they didn't look like." He stopped himself, realizing too late how damning his words were. Mr. Williams raised an eyebrow. "Didn't look like what?" The guard's face flushed, and he stammered, I didn't mean." Before he could finish, Mr. Williams raised a hand, silencing him. His gaze turned to the lifeguard, who had been watching with folded arms, but now looked uncomfortable under Mr. Williams's intense stare. "And you?" Mr. Williams asked, his voice still sharp. "Did you think my children didn't belong here either?" The lifeguard shifted, clearly uneasy. "Look, sir, we just didn't know. They didn't have any proof." "They shouldn't need proof." Mr. Williams's voice was louder now, commanding the attention of the entire crowd. "They are members of this pool. They are part of this community. They didn't owe you any explanation." The crowd was silent, the weight of Mr. Williams's words hanging in the air. Malik watched as some of the onlookers began to shift uncomfortably, realizing how far things had gone. Even the teenagers who had mocked them earlier had gone quiet, their smug expressions replaced by uncertainty. "I expect this to be the last time something like this happens here," Mr. Williams continued, his voice now cold with authority, "and I will be speaking to the board about your behavior." The security guard looked pale, and the lifeguard didn't dare meet Mr. Williams's eyes. Malik could feel the tension slowly beginning to drain from the air, but the anger still simmered beneath the surface. Even though their father had arrived and taken control of the situation, the damage had already been done. The looks, the whispers, the assumptions they couldn't be undone with a few sharp words. Mr. Williams turned back to Malik and Tasha, his expression softening just slightly. "Let's sit for a while," he said quietly, motioning toward their towels. "I want to make sure you're both all right." Malik nodded, grateful that his father was here, but the knot in his chest hadn't disappeared. He followed his dad to their lounge chairs, feeling the eyes of the entire pool on them as they sat down. "Dad, why did this happen?" Tasha asked quietly as they settled down, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Williams sighed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. People make assumptions, Tasha, he said gently. They see what they want to see. And sometimes, no matter how much you prove yourself, they'll still see you as an outsider. Malik stared at the water, the cool surface rippling gently as kids splashed and played. It felt so distant, so far removed from what they had just gone through. It's not fair, he muttered. It's not, Mr. Williams agreed, his voice soft but firm. But that doesn't mean we give up. We don't let them define us. We stand up, like you did today. The quietness that followed Mr. Williams's words lingered between the three of them. Malek sat with his fists clenched, staring at the pool, the sound of children laughing and splashing now a distant echo to him. Tasha sat next to him, biting her lip, her face still flushed from the confrontation. Across the pool, the security guard and the lifeguard seemed to be trying their best to look busy, avoiding the Williams family entirely. A few of the bystanders who had witnessed the exchange were starting to return to their loungers, but Malak noticed the lingering glances and the furtive whispers that continued. They were no longer a spectacle, but they were still the topic of conversation. Malak shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his mind racing. He wanted to just get in the water, to escape the weight of it all, but he couldn't shake the anger and frustration building inside him. It wasn't fair. They hadn't done anything wrong, and yet, here they were, being treated like intruders in their own space. Dad Malak started, his voice low but filled with the frustration that had been simmering beneath the surface. Why do they hate us so much? We didn't even do anything. Mr. Williams sighed deeply, rubbing a hand across his forehead. His usual calm demeanor was still there, but Malik could tell that the situation had affected him more than he was letting on. He didn't like confrontation, but today, it had been unavoidable. It's not that they hate you, Malik, Mr. Williams said carefully, choosing his words as if each one weighed heavily. It's that they don't understand. And when people don't understand something, they assume the worst. But we've been coming here all summer, Tasha chimed in, her voice still shaky. How could they not know us by now? Mr. Williams glanced over at the lifeguard, who was now busy handing out pool noodles to a group of younger kids. People see what they want to see, he said softly. And sometimes, even when they know you, they still choose not to really see you. It's easier for them to believe their assumptions. Malik leaned back in his chair, staring up at the bright blue sky. The warmth of the sun felt heavy on his skin, oppressive even. He had heard his dad say similar things before about the way people made judgments based on skin color, about how no amount of success or money could erase the fact that they were black in a world that still didn't fully accept them. But knowing it didn't make it any easier to deal with. I just don't get why we have to prove ourselves every time, Malik muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Like, why can't they just believe us? His father looked at him with a sad smile, his eyes filled with an understanding that Malik both appreciated and resented. I wish I had an answer for you, son. I really do. The quiet between them stretched on, and Malik's mind wandered back to the confrontation. The way the security guard had looked at him and Tasha, the way the lifeguard had stepped in like he was some kind of authority, even the way the other teenagers had mocked them, feeding off the tension like it was a game. He thought back to the lanky boy, the sneer on his face when he told them to leave. Malik's fist tightened again, the frustration bubbling up. He wanted to say something, do something, but he knew it wouldn't change anything. Not really. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Malek looked up to see the same lanky boy, along with a few of his friends, casually walking toward their side of the pool. His grin was gone now, replaced with something more cautious. Malik tensed immediately, unsure of what was coming. The boy stopped a few feet away, glancing nervously at Mr. Williams before looking back at Malik and Tasha. He hesitated, then rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. Hey, the boy muttered, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. His friends stood behind him, their expressions unreadable. I didn't know you guys. I didn't know your dad owned the place. Malek stared at him, unsure of how to respond. The boy's tone wasn't exactly apologetic, but there was something uneasy about the way he was standing there, as if he were expecting something, though Malik wasn't sure what. Tasha raised an eyebrow, her arms crossed defensively. And what if our dad didn't own the place, she asked, her voice sharper than Malik had ever heard it. Would that have made what you said okay? The boy blinked, caught off guard by Tasha's response. He opened his mouth to reply, but no words came out at first. Malak watched the awkward exchange, feeling a strange mix of vindication and frustration. Well, no, it's not like that, the boy finally stammered. Look, I didn't know, all right? I didn't know who you were. Malik couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped him. That's the problem, isn't it? You didn't know, so you just assumed we didn't belong. The boy flushed, looking even more uncomfortable. His friends glanced at each other but said nothing. One of them, a shorter girl with red hair, tugged on the boy's arm as if to pull him away. But he stayed put, his eyes flickering nervously between Malik and Mr. Williams. I'm just saying, we didn't mean anything by it, the boy mumbled, clearly regretting ever walking over. We were just messing around. Mr. Williams, who had remained silent during the exchange, finally stood up, his tall frame towering over the teenagers. He didn't look angry, but his presence alone was enough to command respect. "You might not have meant anything by it," Mr. Williams said, his voice calm but firm, "but words have power. You made my children feel like they didn't belong here, and that's something you need to think about before you speak next time." The boy shifted uncomfortably, nodding quickly. "Yeah, okay. I get it." "Do you?" Mr. Williams asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Because it's not just about my kids. This happens to a lot of people, in a lot of places, and just because you don't mean harm doesn't mean you're not causing it." The boy looked down at his feet, nodding again. His friends mumbled something under their breath, and within moments they turned and shuffled away, clearly eager to leave the situation behind. Malik let out a slow breath, watching them go. He wasn't sure what he had expected from that exchange, but he didn't feel any better. Sure, the boy had been called out, but it didn't change the way Malik had been made to feel like he didn't belong, not just today, but every time something like this happened. Tasha sighed, slumping back in her chair. "That didn't make me feel any better," she muttered. "Me neither," Malik admitted, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. He stared at the water again, the sunlight reflecting off the surface in shimmering waves. "I just want to swim." Mr. Williams sat back down, his expression softening. "You should." Then he said gently, "This is your pool too." Malik hesitated, glancing around at the pool-goers who were still watching them from a distance. The incident had blown over, but the weight of it remained. Still, maybe his dad was right. Maybe the best way to fight back wasn't with words, but with actions. "Come on," he said, standing up and offering Tasha his hand. "Let's swim." Tasha hesitated for a moment, then took his hand with a small smile. Together, they walked toward the water, ignoring the whispers and the eyes that still followed them. And as they dove into the cool, refreshing water, for the first time that day, they felt like they belonged. The cool water enveloped Malik and Tasha as they swam, their movements slow and deliberate as they allowed the tension of the day to melt away. For a few moments, the weight of everything that had happened, the stares, the confrontation, the whispers seemed to fade into the background. In the water, they felt light, unburdened, as if nothing else mattered. But as they surfaced, the world was still there, waiting for them. The onlookers hadn't entirely dispersed. A few of them still sat by the pool's edge, glancing over occasionally. The lifeguard was back in his chair, his eyes sweeping across the pool, though Malik noticed he made a point not to look in their direction anymore. Even the security guard had retreated to the far end of the pool, trying to appear busy with something on his phone. Their father sat on the lounge chair, watching them swim with a soft expression on his face. There was pride there, but also something deeper, a weariness that Malik hadn't noticed before. It was as if today's events had drawn something out of him, a reminder of battles fought over and over again. Malik recognized that look. It was one he had seen on his father's face before, after similar incidents, but his dad never let it break him. And today wouldn't be any different. Malik and Tasha swam to the edge of the pool and pulled themselves out, water dripping from their skin as they made their way back to their father's side. They sat down on the edge of the lounge chair next to him, their bodies still buzzing with the energy of the day. Mr. Williams looked at them, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Feeling better?" he asked gently. Malik nodded, though the knot in his chest hadn't fully disappeared. "Yeah, a little." Tasha, who had been quieter than usual since the confrontation, stared down at her feet, her wet curls clinging to her face. "It's just, why do they always assume we don't belong? It's like no matter where we go, we're always being questioned." Mr. Williams sighed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Because people fear what they don't understand," he said softly, "and sometimes it's easier for them to assume the worst rather than take the time to know the truth." Tasha frowned, wiping at her face with a towel. "But that's not fair. They don't know us. Why can't they just see us for who we are?" Malik could hear the frustration in her voice, the anger that she had been holding in all day. He felt it too. It wasn't just about the pool, it was about everything. It was about the way people looked at them when they walked into a store, the way their teachers treated them differently in class, the way people always seemed to be waiting for them to mess up. It was exhausting. Mr. Williams reached over, gently placing a hand on Tasha's shoulder. "I know, sweetie. It's not fair. And I wish I could tell you that things will change overnight, but they won't. This is something we'll always have to deal with. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting." Tasha looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But what if they never change?" For a moment, Mr. Williams was silent, as if considering her question carefully. Then he smiled, a small but determined smile. "They will," he said, his voice steady. "Maybe not all at once, and maybe not in every place, but they will. Every time we stand up for ourselves, every time we show them that we belong just as much as anyone else, we're helping to change things." Malik sat quietly, letting his father's words sink in. He understood what his dad was saying. He had heard it before, but today it felt different. It felt personal. He had stood up today, he had defended himself and his sister, but it hadn't felt like enough. There was still so much work to do, so much ignorance to confront. As the three of them sat there, a familiar voice interrupted the quiet moment. Malik looked up to see one of the women who had been watching earlier, the one with the wide-brimmed sun hat and sunglasses. She approached cautiously, her steps slow, as if she wasn't sure if she should be there at all. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice soft and tentative. She removed her sunglasses, revealing kind but worried eyes. I wanted to apologize for what happened earlier." Mr. Williams straightened in his chair, his expression unreadable. Malik exchanged a glance with Tasha, unsure of what to make of this sudden approach. The woman wrung her hands nervously. "I saw the whole thing, and, well, I didn't say anything. I should have. It wasn't right the way they treated you." Malik stared at her, not sure how to respond. Part of him appreciated her words, but another part of him was still angry. If she had seen everything, why hadn't she stepped in sooner? Why had she, like so many others, just watched it all unfold? "I don't know what else to say," the woman continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I've lived here for years, and I've never seen anything like that happen at this pool. But I guess, maybe that's part of the problem. I didn't see it, because it wasn't happening to me." Mr. Williams nodded slowly, his gaze steady. "Thank you for your words," he said quietly. "It means a lot that you're acknowledging it." The woman looked relieved, though there was still guilt in her eyes. "I'll talk to the other parents," she added quickly. "We need to do better, as a community, and I hope you and your family will still feel welcome here." Malik shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He appreciated the woman's apology, but it felt incomplete, like it didn't really fix anything. Would it stop the next person from assuming the worst? Would it change the way people looked at him and Tasha the next time they came to the pool? He wasn't sure. Mr. Williams nodded again, offering a polite smile. "We appreciate that," he said. "But it's not just about us. This is about making sure no one else has to go through what we did today. It's about making sure this community truly welcomes everyone, not just the people who look like they belong." The woman swallowed, nodding quickly. "Yes, of course, you're absolutely right." After a brief pause, she glanced at Malik and Tasha, giving them a small, awkward smile. "Well, I'll let you get back to your day," she said softly. "But thank you for being so understanding." She turned and walked away, leaving the family in silence once again. Malik watched her go, a strange feeling settling in his chest. He wasn't sure if he felt better or worse after the apology. Tasha sighed beside him, leaning back in her chair. "Do you think she really means it?" she asked quietly. Mr. Williams was silent for a moment before responding. "I think she does," he said slowly. "But it's not enough to just mean it. People need to act on it. They need to do the work." The weight of Mr. Williams's words hung in the air, resonating deeply with Malik and Tasha. They both sat quietly, processing the moment, while the sounds of the pool continued around them, laughter, splashing, and the occasional whistle from a lifeguard. But for Malik, it was hard to focus on anything other than the unease that still sat heavily in his chest. As the woman walked away, another figure approached from the opposite direction. It was the security guard. His shoulders were slumped now, his sunglasses tucked into his shirt pocket, and he looked nervous, as if he were dreading the conversation to come. Malik felt a surge of anger rise within him again. This was the man who had caused all of this, who had treated them like criminals from the start, who had called the police without even giving them a chance. But before Malik could say anything, Mr. Williams raised a hand, silently telling him to hold back. The guard came to a stop in front of them, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. His once authoritative demeanor had vanished, replaced by something that almost resembled regret. I wanted to apologize," the guard said, his voice low. He glanced at Mr. Williams, then at Malik and Tasha, before continuing. "I didn't know. I didn't mean to, treat you like that." Malik narrowed his eyes, feeling the bitterness rising again. Didn't know what he asked sharply. Didn't know we were the owner's kids, or didn't know we belonged here at all. The guard flinched at the accusation, looking uncomfortable. "I didn't know who you were," he said defensively. "You have to understand, it's my job to make sure everything runs smoothly here. I thought you were just trying to sneak in." Mr. Williams's eyes were hard as he listened, but his voice remained calm. "And what made you think that? What made you assume my children didn't belong here?" The guard opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He hesitated, glancing down at his shoes as if he were searching for an excuse that no longer held any weight. After a moment, he sighed. "I don't know. I guess I just jumped to conclusions." Malik's anger flared again. "No, you didn't guess. You didn't wonder. You knew. You assumed because of what we look like." Tasha, who had been quiet for most of the conversation, suddenly spoke up, her voice steady but filled with the emotion she had been holding back all day. "We didn't do anything wrong. You didn't even give us a chance to explain. You just saw us and decided we didn't belong." The guard's face flushed, and he shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for the weight of Tasha's words. "Look, I didn't mean any harm," he mumbled. "I was just doing my job." "Your job," Malik's voice rose. "Your job is to keep people safe, not to harass kids because they don't look like everyone else here." Mr. Williams placed a hand on Malik's shoulder, gently calming him. "We're not asking for special treatment," he said to the guard, his voice firm but measured. "But we are asking for basic respect. My children shouldn't have to prove they belong here any more than anyone else. Do you understand that?" The guard nodded quickly, looking more than a little embarrassed. "Yeah, I get it. I'm really sorry. I won't let it happen again." Malik wasn't sure if he believed him, but he didn't push it any further. He was too tired to keep arguing. He just wanted to go home, to leave this whole mess behind. Mr. Williams nodded curtly. "I'll be speaking to the board about this, and we'll make sure the policies here are changed so something like this doesn't happen again." The guard swallowed hard, nodding once more before backing away, clearly eager to leave the conversation behind. As he walked off, Malik watched him go, the frustration still simmering beneath the surface. Tasha sighed heavily, her shoulders slumping. "I'm so tired of this," she muttered, wiping at her eyes. Malik couldn't agree more. The whole day had felt like a whirlwind of emotions: frustration, anger, humiliation. It was exhausting, and it seemed like no matter how much they tried to push back, there would always be people ready to question them, to treat them like they didn't belong. Their father's voice broke the silence, his tone softer now. "I know this isn't easy," Mr. Williams said, looking at both of them with a mix of pride and sadness. "But what you did today, standing up for yourselves, that matters. It might not feel like it right now, but it does." Malik glanced at Tasha, who was still sitting quietly, her eyes downcast. He wasn't sure if either of them felt like they had accomplished much today, but their dad's words stayed with him, lingering in his mind like a seed that had been planted, waiting to grow. A few moments later, as they began to gather their things, Malik noticed another group of kids approaching the pool this time, a mix of races, black, Latino, white. They walked in with carefree smiles, laughing and chatting, clearly unaware of the drama that had just unfolded. They paid no attention to Malik or Tasha as they passed by, their only concern the cool water waiting for them. Malik watched them for a moment, feeling a strange sense of hope. Maybe things were changing, slowly but surely. Maybe, one day, he wouldn't have to worry about being questioned every time he walked into a place like this. Maybe Tasha wouldn't have to explain herself to anyone. It wouldn't be today, and it probably wouldn't be tomorrow. But maybe, someday, it would be different. As they made their way to the exit, Tasha looked up at Malik, her expression softening. "Thanks for standing up for us," she said quietly. "I don't think I could have done it without you." Malik smiled, feeling a swell of pride. "We've got to look out for each other, right?" "Right," Tasha agreed, her smile small but genuine. Mr. Williams walked ahead of them, his head held high. Malik knew their father would continue to fight this battle in ways they couldn't even see yet. He had always been a man who pushed for change, who refused to back down in the face of injustice. And now, more than ever, Malik understood why. As they left the pool behind, the weight of the day still heavy on their shoulders, Malik couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope in his chest. It wasn't over. It would never be over. But they had taken a step forward today, and that, at least, was something.